Alright, today we're going to be talking a little bit about phonetics. Phonetics is the study of speech sounds, and you can look at phonetics from two different ways. From articulation, so what you're actually doing with your mouth as you produce the speech sounds, and also you can talk about, so that's articulatory phonetics. You can also talk about acoustic phonetics, and that's sort of the acoustic characteristics of the speech sounds. And we're not going to talk about acoustic phonetics at all. So we're just going to talk a little bit about articulatory phonetics, starting with consonants. And then later on today we'll be talking about vowels. Alright. So articulatory phonetics. So when you produce sounds, it usually begins with air coming out of your lungs. And your diaphragm pushes the air up out of your lungs, and then it enters the throat. At the throat, your throat contains a structure that's called the glottis, which has the vocal folds, and the vocal folds will either vibrate or not, depending on what your glottal state is. So glottal state is an important term. This just refers to what you're doing with your glottis or with your vocal folds. And glottal state is what is the difference, for example, between the sound S and Z. So if you should try this, take your hand and touch the front of your throat. If you say S, there's no vibration. You shouldn't feel your throat vibrating. But if you put your hand on the front of your throat and say Z, zzz, you should feel that vibration at the front of your throat. And this is going to be important that you know this, so make sure that you can feel the difference. Okay, so after it comes out of the lungs, and then it passes through your vocal folds, which are either vibrating, if it's a voiced sound like Z, or not vibrating, if it's a voiceless sound like S, the airflow is going to come out of your mouth, or out of your nose, or both. And we'll talk a little bit more about whether it's coming out of your mouth or your nose a little bit later on in this lecture. So in addition to glottal state, which determines voicing, we also have to know the manner of articulation and the place of articulation in order to describe a consonant. So manner of articulation refers to sort of the type of constriction that you're creating in your mouth. So how much air is flowing through the mouth, where the air is flowing. So for example, the sound S, you have a really sort of tight constriction. Your tongue is moved way up to the top of your mouth, but there's a little bit of space there that the air is forced through, which creates that sort of noisy sound. Versus a sound like T, where the tip of your tongue is coming all the way to the roof of your mouth, and then it's being released down. So that's different. Those are different manners of articulation. There are also places of articulation. So this is where in the body you're making a sound. So the sound P, for example, you're closing your lips, p, and then releasing them, but it's with your lips. And then the sound T, ta, 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 you are taking the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth. Versus the sound K, 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 where it's the back of your tongue coming to the top of your mouth. So those are different places of articulation. And we'll talk a little bit more about these features with a little anatomy. So down at the bottom we have the glottis, and we already talked about that a little bit. You can see the vocal folds there as part of the glottis. You can also produce sounds at the glottis. So like the sound H, the H sound, that's considered a glottal sound because the glottis is wide open. It's just totally wide open and the air is rushing through. The pharynx is another place of articulation, as is the uvula. And these are not ones that we use in English much, so I'm not really going to talk about them much. But these are places of articulation that you would see, for example, in Arabic, where they have a lot of sounds that are produced near the back of the throat. Next is the velum. The velum is this little, the uvula is the thing that dangles down in the back. The velum is actually right above that, and this closes or opens, which determines whether the air is coming through the mouth, through the lips, or through the nasal cavity up above. Again, we'll get to nasal sounds a little later. You can also, like the sound, we don't, really far back, that's made using the velum, but that's a sound that we have in English either. Oh, sorry. Also, a sound like ka, ga. Those are getting back towards the velum. Now the palate, this is where sounds like nya, from Spanish, the enya, the n with the little tilde above it. Also sounds like sh, zh, those are also made using the palate. So if you say those sh, zh, or nya, you should feel that your tongue is moving sort of in the middle of the roof of your mouth. For the alveolar ridge, we make a lot of sounds here. It's pretty easy to make sounds here. So T and D, you can feel the tongue touching pretty close behind the teeth. Also S, Z, S and Z. Sound N, that your tongue is touching the roof of your mouth there. So a lot of sounds are made at the alveolar ridge. The teeth are also an important articulator. So articulators are things that can help you articulate sounds. So you use your teeth in sounds like th and v, the sounds that are spelled th in English. Your tongue tip is sticking out between your teeth. You also use your teeth for sounds like f and v, th and v. You should feel your top teeth coming into contact with your lower lip for those sounds. And finally, we have the lips. And the lips are used in sounds like P and B and M, where your lips come all the way together to touch. So you can make speech sounds with all of these parts. And just to point out, here's the nasal cavity, which is not an articulator, but which will be important later. Okay, and so we have all these anatomical terms, and they all correspond to adjectives. So I can say that something is a nasal sound, a labial sound, a dental sound, an alveolar sound, etc. So these are all important terms to know. They're talked about a little bit more in the Harley article that is required reading for today. But just so you know, these are all sort of fair game terms. All right, so we need a way to represent these sounds. And English spelling is not going to do the trick. This is sort of a famous example. You can spell fish G-H-O-T-I. If you take the F sound, the GH sound, from the word tough, which is pronounced like an F, the I sound, the first syllable of the word women, is spelled with an O but pronounced sort of I. And the sh sound, like which is spelled T-I in the word fiction. So if you put all those together, you get G-H-O-T-I pronounced as fish. However, if I wrote that out, you probably wouldn't be able to recreate. That wouldn't really be a very good way to represent the speech sounds. So instead we use something that's called the IPA. And you can see the IPA symbols for those sounds between the slashes. So F, I, esh, sh, sh. So that's sort of the reason why we have this IPA. So the IPA stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet. And again, this is sort of supposed to help us because there are so many different writing systems used for languages around the world. The English spelling system sort of attempts to spell the sounds of the language, but it doesn't do a great job a lot of the time. Like in tough, why do we spell F with a GH? That's not really very transparent. So the grapheme, or the letter, does not always correspond to the phoneme, or the sound. Also, different languages have different sounds that we don't even have in English, so obviously English spelling is not going to be able to capture those sounds very well. This woman in the picture here If you watch the optional YouTube video, it's really fun. She speaks a language, an African language that has clicks, and she's singing a song with the clicks, so it's kind of a hoot. Anyhow, but we need a way to represent consistently all of the sounds, not only in English, but in all of the spoken languages on Earth. So for this, we have the IPA chart. I think I'm going to split this into the second half of the lecture. So hang on one moment.